Caroline Karimi is in the studio with us this morning. She's the head of the Children and Anti-Fgm Unit at the ODPP. Just in case you're wondering, the Office of the Director of Public Prosecutions. Caroline, karibu sana to the Situation Room.
Thank you very much for having me.
Glad to have you here. It is the Day of the African Child, celebrating African children, celebrating the milestones that have been reached in their protections. So, City, here's that thing you're looking for. Celebrating the milestones that have been reached in their protections, celebrating, the fact that a lot more children, for example, in 2022 have been able to go to school, that a lot more children have been saved from very many things like early marriage and female genital mutilation, and that more children can live in the freedoms by which children should actually be exposed to be able to play, to be able to discover, to be able to be a child. And so to look and to push for certain things is why the Day of the African Child was realized in the first place. Now, even as we celebrate that, Karimi, as you've asked us to call you fondly, there are very many things that require us to look at in terms of how difficult they have been and where we are today to say that truly the African child is protected. But we're interested to note, first of all, it is Justice Thursday after all, and looking at things justice and different ways in which justice is applied. What does your office do? What does your specific unit do within the Office of the Director of Public Prosecutions towards the protection of children?
All right. So ODPP is a constitutional office that is given the mandate of prosecution, and that means handling of criminal matters. So we enforce the criminal law. So for anyone who commits an offense, we take these matters to court and we try them in court. And within the ODPP, there are various departments, and under the departments are divisions. So my division falls under the Department of Conventional and Related Crimes. So this is basically any offenses against the person. So it's a specialized division handling specifically matters relating to children. We have prosecutors stationed there who are specifically trained on children matters and looking into what are the rights of children, how are they being infringed, and how can we allow the access to justice for these children who are victims of crimes, and just ensuring that these rights of the child are protected. And within the Children's Division also is the Anti-Fgm Unit, which we all know FGM is a harmful cultural right that is practiced in Africa and Kenya. So we also look at where these offenses are. Like we already marked the hotspot areas where FGM is perpetrated, because it's not in all communities that FGM is exercised. Yeah, so basically, apart from prosecuting these cases, we also look into the welfare of the victims and the witnesses who we handle, because they come to us as the persons who can give this evidence in court. So we look at how to protect them, give them social support, psychological support. So in a nutshell, that is what my division does.
Okay.
Is the office of the ODPP, is it represented in every county in the country?
Yes. We have presence at the sub-county level.
Oh, at the sub-county level.
Exactly. And even in places where we don't have, we have marginalized and far-flung areas, we even have mobile courts and we have presence there.
Oh, that's very, very good. And what efforts has the office made to ensure that the services that the ODPP offer are available to them in these many, many counties?
Okay, first of all is sending out prosecutors down to the sub-county level.
Yes.
The most marginalized of areas that you can imagine. We ensure that we have presence so that these people don't have to travel long distances just to access justice. So, and then in addition to that, we ensure that these prosecutors are properly equipped with the skills required to ensure that they perform their prosecutorial duties properly. And that includes training them, providing necessary resources for them to be able to perform these duties. The world is becoming a digital space, and I think COVID did teach us a lot. So we are also keeping abreast with the, digitalization and not being left behind on that. So basically, I think with time, of course, we want to ensure that even for these mobile courts, because mobile basically means it's a temporary kind of court. It's there today, tomorrow it's not there. We want to ensure that we are able to have a station court. Like right now we have the DAB, which initially didn't have a court. So we have the DAB now fully operational with the prosecutor and the magistrate, and the cases are now going on.
So what kind of cases are we seeing? I mean, for me, even every time I think about this, a bit worrisome. What kind of cases are we seeing coming to your unit, your division, that are affecting children?
I think the highest number of cases we have are defilement cases. This is where a child has been sexually abused. We have cases of indecent assault, we have FGM, we have physical violence to children, neglect by persons who have duty over these children. So that's as child victims. And all the other offenses that can happen to an adult actually are perpetrated against children. So murder, if there's robbery and violence, they are harmed in the process. And we also have children who commit offenses that we also process through the system. And these children are usually, they're called subjects. And they also commit the same offenses that adults can commit. We have children who have committed murder, robbery with violence, some even defraud, white paper kind of crimes.
Wow.
Yes.
So one of the issues that we often see with defilement, I'm just looking at that specific one, is that then because of their age, children then will not give testimony in court. Is that true? Is that the case? Or must somebody then speak on their behalf?
They actually do come to court and they give their evidence. But they have protections under the Children's Act, which guarantee that any child coming to the court should have their case heard in camera. Camera means you remove the public and you're left with the court officials. That is the magistrate, the prosecutor, the court clerk, and the defense advocate. So basically trying to create a conducive environment for this child. One, protecting their privacy, and then making them able to relax, because in a courtroom full of adults, a child will not relax and they might not give evidence. We have had instances like that. But there are also other mechanisms in the law that can give exceptions to the child having to come into open court. So we can have them testify via video link, so meaning they're in a different room and they're linked to the court. Or they are behind a witness protection box so that they're not really directly facing the accused person.
Another issue that we've seen, unfortunately, especially with the defilement of girls, is that family members then, most times, with what we're calling it like an interference of justice, will then make a decision on behalf of this girl because a family member has spoken to them. We've heard from the chiefs, from the Ngaos, often that the family will come in and say, look, can we give something? And it's usually monetary. And then this case kind of disappears. It doesn't take away the fact that this child has been defiled. How do you deal with that coming then from a state division and still looking for justice to be served for these children?
Right. What you're saying is correct. That happens. And Maslaha is a very big name. We all know what happens, especially in Northeastern, where the community elders will have a discussion around a case and they agree, and there's compensation that passes between the elders. And the families and the victim is told, now this case has been concluded, out of court, you should not show up in court. And that's a big challenge for us as prosecution, because if you want to ensure that the law is enforced and you are not able to get these victims to come and testify, that means our cases collapse in court. So as a state agency, first of all, we need information. So if a witness disappears, the first thing is to find out, why has this victim not shown up in court? Is it because they are indisposed? Did they not know about the hearing? Or has there been interference? And that requires somebody from the family or the community to come to us and tell us this is what is happening at home. And once we get that information, there are sections in the law on what happens to people who interfere with cases. So these cases are sent to the police, and they're investigated, and people are charged with the interference of these cases. So there's a criminal process for anyone who interferes with these cases. But it is important for the public to be able to give us this information.
It's monetary a lot of times as well. That family, and then also looking at a troubling statistic is that those children who are defiled, more often than not, are defiled by an elder member of their own family. And then we see then that the monetary, the interference a lot of times is monetary, and that it is poorer families who probably are thinking going through the entire justice system, whereas I can get something here and talk to my child, everything will be all right. Are there ways to circumvent that? Or is it really because we are dealing with a family setting that it might be difficult from a legal state point of view? Again, looking at the protections of these children.
Well, I think the first thing is to be able to connect with the communities, with the citizens. And ODPP has been doing a lot of sensitizations for these families and encouraging them to trust that the legal process will take due course and the need to allow us to be able to execute our mandate. So a lot of awareness and sensitization around if this is what is happening to you at the family level, maybe you're a mother and you're being forced to take this money, or the uncles and the other around you want to take the money so that the case can end, you can go and report this to the police. So apart from telling them the law works, we educate them on how to access this law, and encouraging them to go and report these instances, and also sensitizing them to the plight of the victim. Because if a child has been defiled, the first pain is with the child. The rest of you just imagine what pain this child must be going through.
Yeah.
So just encouraging them, before you decide to sit aside and negotiate a case regarding a person other than yourself who's been a victim of a crime, think about what is the impact of that crime on this victim, and be the first person to protect them. So we have various forums where we can do that. Apart from what our office is doing, we also are able to participate in court users committees. Yeah. And court users committees are just a gathering of anyone who uses the court. Yes. So we are talking about state, which is us, and judiciary, and the non-state actors. So you have the community elders, you have the Nyumba Kumi elders, you have representatives from the communities, the religious elders, we even private citizens, the chiefs, everyone sits there. And, all these challenges are discussed, and recommendations come out of it. And these are taken back to the community, because if you have a Nyumba Kumi representative within the court users committee, they're able to go back to their estates, and, if they know of a case that is being negotiated out of court, they're able to, harness it before it progresses too far. We also educate the victims to be able to have a voice for themselves. So we have, there is a helpline called helpline number 116. And even a child who is having their case negotiated out of court can be able to call this helpline and give out this information. We have 1195, a toll-free line for GBV. So victims themselves are being given an opportunity to have a voice and speak out. Yeah. And out of that, we've been able to get children out of situations where the immediate family wants the case to die at the estate level.
Right.
Yes.
Let me ask this question. Let me preamble my question by making a statement. The efforts that are being made are clearly purposed and clearly they are intended to bring the positive results. But how do you measure the success of your intervention?
Right. So, of course, data is very important. Yes. Because it's the only tool that you can use to measure how well you're performing your duties, how well your interventions are working. So at a court level, we are able to tell, for example, we had this number of cases that were reported and they came to us as prosecution, but at the end of it all, they were withdrawn And why were they withdrawn? When we look back, we find it was because of non-availability of witnesses. And then we go further and look at, from this non-availability of witnesses, what were the causes for this non-availability? Was there interference? Yes. From this interference, how many of these cases have been reported and they are being prosecuted? So we are able to get from the system how many offenses are there for interference of cases. We also have a complaints mechanism within the ODPP, which is open to the public. So the public comes to us and we are able to gauge how many complaints we have received and what nature of complaints are these, and then what interventions have worked from us receiving and responding to these complaints. So those are the two mechanisms that we use. We also get we have social media pages where we get feedback from the public, and they will tell us, this is working, this is not working. We were at your offices on this day, we did not get help, and we respond. We do not ignore any of those complaints from the public. So it's a concerted effort, and it's also, at this court users committee, we also get feedback from the other stakeholders. They will tell us, these are the challenges we're seeing with you as prosecution. And so it's just a matter of measuring. And so we have tools within the office that help us to do this measuring, and departments and divisions dedicated to that. We even have a department that deals with complaints against prosecutors. Right? So the public is encouraged, either anonymously or openly, to come and make complaints. And the department is dedicated to ensure that there's response from that kind of complaint.
When you talk about, child marriages and gender-based violence, would you say that the communities where you find these practices rampant, would you say that there is a clear indication of a decline in some of these cases? And if there is, that clearly means that whatever messaging and whatever interventions are successful. And if there are cases of resistance, meaning people want to continue their practices, what would you say are some of the key reasons why people want to persist in these practices? And if you're saying persist, who are the agents that are most represented in this resistance movement to these changes?
First of all, yes, there has been a decline in these cases. If you look at, let's talk about FGM, because that's where the big problem is. If you look at time before the enactment of the Prohibition Against Female Genital Mutilation Act, that was in 2011, you will find the cases have over the years declined, meaning that the law is working,
Yes.
as opposed to before we had the law. So, but still, with the law, there are people who will still continue to perpetrate these offenses, and you will find that most of the times it's because of the culture or the behaviors and the attitudes of people within a certain community. I'll give you an example of the Kisii and the Kuri and the Kehancha communities that practice FGM. And you will find that the society has made it in such a way that it is very difficult for one of its members to remove themselves from the community because of the protective nature of a community and say no to FGM. And how they make it impossible is, for example, a mother who does not allow their daughter to go through FGM is ostracized and is given a derogatory name.
Yes.
Egesagane. So you find when this woman goes to the market, nobody wants to sell to her because
they're stigmatized.
They're stigmatized from it. So the community makes it very difficult for people to walk away from these activities. And then also there's what we call the myths and misconceptions around it. Like you will be told that if you don't remove the clitoris, because part of FGM is where the clitoris is removed, it will overgrow. Or it's a dirty thing, right. Or it's a it signifies that you're promiscuous. So because people enslaved within this cultural kind of mindset, it becomes very difficult to remove it because of the stigmatization, the repercussions around you refusing to undertake those community practices. In other communities, like up in the Meru area, you'll be told that you'll be cast by the Nchirincheke. So who wants to be cast?
And these are messages that are being sent to children, isn't it? These things are essentially telling children, and they then grow up within that mindset.
Exactly, because for some communities it's a rite of passage. So if you're in an age group, there's all that passing down of the cultural practices of a community. So as you grow up, you're being taught this is how you pass your rituals. You have to go through it, and many people might want to blame the mother and the father for making these girls go through it. But we've had instances where the parents are saying, we do not want to partake of these kind of practices. But these girls then, within their age group, will take themselves to a forest or a place away from the community and perform FGM on themselves, or get somebody to perform this FGM. So that narrative, it's a mindset really. And what we are working towards, and what we have seen to be most effective with these harmful practices, is the change of mindset. Because most of them are not afraid of the law. They will do whatever it takes to circumvent the law. Yeah.
It's 9:30 on the nose. We're having a conversation celebrating the Day of the African Child with head of the Children's Division and Anti-Fgm Unit from the Office of the ODPP, Karimi. And we're saying, look, these are some issues that we are facing on a daily, even still dealing with children's matters in the country. So even as we celebrate, let's interrogate and say, look, what is happening? What is the state? How can we improve things?
This is the Situation Room, the only way to start your day.
Conversation continues on this day where we celebrate the Day of the African Child on Kenya's Biggest Conversation, and indeed around the world. We are joined by Caroline Karimi this morning, and we're looking at issues concerning, justice, how it is served to children, and the conversations that are important to have in a situation whereby the voices of children have been lost. So even if we're saying celebrate the African child, the question remains, how then do we bring back the voices of children, especially when it comes to the determination of justice? And some of the questions coming through this morning, it's clear that the efforts are being made. But then the question still remains that what more must be done? One of the things that you said, because I know CT also has a question that he wants to ask, but one of the things that you said, Karimi, was that, if we are looking at a situation of defilement, for example, and we had many cases where with the cooperation of, different members, then you're able to remove the child from that situation. Where do these children go?
Right. So the government has facilities that can take up these children. There are rescue centers that are built to house these children who find themselves in the system by virtue of being a victim of an offense or by other issues that bring them into the system. For example, a child who's being neglected. So these facilities are housed by the Department of Children's Services, and they offer, a place of safety for this child. Services, social support services are offered. We have children officers stationed there, counselors who are able to work with the child to address the mental health issues, because mental health is really a big factor that's currently really being spoken about. And then when they're within these institutions, the social background is addressed, because the government officers are able now to go back to where they came from and try to understand what is failing, and who are the people who are failing on their duties, and what interventions can be given to every specific child that goes into that. So they're protected that way. And apart from having them in institutions, because it's not the best place to keep a child. You want a child in a family setup, so that there is good development, both of the psychological, their physical well-being and so on. So alternative care is also something that is being picked up, and very fast. And alternative care, we're talking about kinship, adoption, foster care, finding which other place other than an institution can we take this child so that they are in a family setup. So you're talking about relatives, finding who are their relatives. So that's kinship. Take them to a relative, an auntie, an uncle, a grandma. And then foster care is where families just agree to take up these children and raise them up like their own. Adoption, I think it's a bit rather obvious. And apart from that, if a child is in grave danger by virtue of them being a witness, in Nambata we have the Witness Protection Agency that has its own mechanisms to protect these children.
You know, every society, every community, there are those who call them gatekeepers, there are those who call them custodians of their traditions and their norms. And they're essentially opinion shapers and opinion leaders. Now, in your work, I'm certain you pick them out, you find them, you understand and you know them. I'm interested in knowing what it is you do with them, because if their opinions and views are not changed about these interventions, then you will do all that work, but they'll continue doing what they did before. But if you change their views, then they are the agents who would help you change the views of the community.
Right.
Yeah.
So here comes the question. What work have you done with such individuals, and how successful has that been?
So what you say, Siti, is absolutely true. And we realized this when we had a reflection on the effectiveness of the law and wondering why we have the law, yet we still have perpetrators of these offenses. And we've worked together with the Anti-Fgm board, which is a government body set up especially for FGM, and other organizations like UNFPA, which put a lot of resources into eradicating these harmful cultural practices. And we came to the realization that, as you call them, the gatekeepers, the power wielders of the community. So these are the council of elders, the religious elders, who actually hold the community together, and everybody has serious respect for them. And nobody wants to go against what they say. And everybody will go where they say. So we tailored interventions at a multi-sectoral level. So we are talking about coming together as government and non-state actors and putting up programs for community engagement. So under community engagement, we are able to go down to the communities, ground level, identify who are these power wielders, and then find a way of bringing them together at a place, and first of all, allowing them to understand that they have audience, they can be heard, and then we speak back with them after they have given us their opinion. And the reason for this is we realized if you come in forcefully, they become defensive, and they will tell the community, don't listen to these people. But when it is an engagement, a discussion with them, we've been able to change a lot of mindsets. Like the Maasai, there's been a great decline of some of these practices with the Maasai because of the engagements we've had with their elders, the Samburu in Narok, and so on and so forth. And it has been so impactful that this is being rolled out into other communities. So Northeastern seems to be the untouched area, because there's a mixture of culture and religion intertwined into one. But we are still penetrating slowly. So community engagement of these power wielders seems to be working very well. And they're able to go back to their communities and they give directions. And because the communities listen to them, we have been seeing a lot of change, abandonment of these practices, taking up of alternative rites of passage where these harmful cultural practices are a rite of passage. So I think that is where we need to go. Yes, hand in hand. I mean, the law continues to work, but we must change the mindset.
Yeah. So then do we have, because through our justice conversations, and I think it's just interesting if you can make the connect between the two, alternative justice resolution. I mean, some of the things that we look at that and say, and as you talk about now working hand in hand with the law, that means then bringing other members of the society or the communities to work on this together. Do you then, in any case ever, kind of seed the, I don't want to say power, but then do you cede the position to members of this community to then communicate some of these things that the law would then somehow be a little bit straitjacket then when it comes to then dealing with them? Do you cede some of this responsibility to them?
For us to cede responsibility to them, it's a delicate balance, because then you don't want them to say like we are ready to throw the law out,
Right.
for us to be able to, for us to get them to come to our side. But it's more of making them understand why that particular practice is harmful, because if they don't understand that, you cannot move. And many of them will tell you, my great grandmother went through this rite of passage. She's fine. There's no problem. So you cannot tell us our practice is wrong. But you have to, it's more like coming down to where they are,
Right.
and making them understand that you understand why they are doing that. But here's the reason why it is harmful. So if you can get them to see that harmful aspect, and why they need to get their communities to completely abandon it, then you have, in a way, ceded.
Yes.
So you're not going down with the police officers and raiding
Yes.
an entire community. You're telling them, we know you're practicing this. We are actually aware it's happening right now as we sit here. But we're not here to arrest anyone today. We're here to have a discussion. So you're not enforcing immediately. You're finding a better way of addressing the issue.
You know, even as we discuss or celebrate the Day of the African Child, yesterday we did have a bit of a worrying conversation. And I mean, we may step left in terms of subject just a little bit, still then around children and then justice and what the law provides for them. But then it would appear as though there's a proliferation of abuse of children when it comes to being not aware of their rights as children. And so we're not looking at defilement, we're not looking at gender-based violence, we're not talking about robbery or things like this, but we're talking about their exploitation of their rights. So what comes, or where does the law step in here? And even as getting granular as saying, in a country where the rights of a child are guaranteed for things like education and care and things like that, how does the law then step in to care for these kids if, for example, they're being exploited by an external force, they don't have an opportunity to go to school, that they miss the food on a daily basis while living under the care of their parents? How are they protected here?
Okay, so this is... There's one concept that for the longest time has been ignored. It's been there, but it's been ignored. And that's the concept of child participation. How many platforms are we availing to these children for them to be able to come forth and ask questions, for them to understand what their rights are, where they can find those rights, because we know we have the law, we have statutes, and how they can report offenses being committed against them, and who are these within the community that are immediately available to them for them to run to. So engagements with these children is what is being picked up so much by the NCAJ. So NCAJ is the umbrella where you have all these state actors.
Yes.
So we are having school programs where actors are going to schools and educating children on what are the existing laws and how can they access justice, how can they participate in this process. I'll give you an example of the children's bill that is currently at the Senate. There was child participation in it, where children were given an opportunity to talk about what kind of laws they want to see that can help to protect their rights. So offering platforms and understanding this, these children have a voice and they have a say and they have an opinion, and being brave enough to allow that kind of platform to thrive is what is the clarion call being given out to all the state actors. Because if you don't empower these children by telling them what are their rights and the various ways in which these rights are infringed, you'd be surprised about children who've been defiled. They did not know it was defilement.
And they actually, in some warped understanding, thought that it was all right.
Yes. They thought it was okay. Maybe because it was done to them by their father or their uncle or somebody who they perceive to love them and who takes care of them. And it takes for us, the stakeholders, to now go down and tell them, this is what defilement is, this is how it presents itself. And when it happens to you, this is exactly what you do. This is where you go to report. This is the persons who can help you to rescue you out of that situation and get you the necessary support and justice for yourself. So we must allow these children to be part of the engagement. We can no longer speak government to government or government to the actors. We have to bring them into the arena. And especially because we have an emerging area of law, online child sexual exploitation, where there's a lot going on in the internet. We are giving our children phones, and there's a lot of grooming and sextortion and child pornography happening on these phones, but they don't understand what is happening. If we don't empower them, then we'll never get to know when these offenses are committed.
You know, the Day of the African Child, the history behind it is an interesting one. 1976, Soweto, South Africa. South Africa hadn't gotten their independence yet. And 10,000 children protest, go on a march. The reports indicate that it was something like half a mile long of people. Okay? And what they're protesting was not just the poor quality of the education they were receiving, but they even demanded, now look, we need to be taught in our own language. Now, and I look at our country and I look at the deplorable state of some of the schools we have, or a total absence of considering the nature and the way in which some people live, especially the nomadic communities or pastoralists, and providing a quality education. And the quality education comes to mind when you consider that at the end of 8 years, you're examined. At the end of, that's changing now, at the end of 4 years, you're examined. Same examination. Yet conditions for these children are not the same. So when we talk about the Day of the African Child, I have to talk about the Day of the Kenyan child and the disadvantage, because this disadvantage isn't just at the level of schooling. It carries on later into your life because it's what more or less determines what you're going to do, but it's born out of this background of disadvantage. Now, as the ODPP, do you deal with many cases where such matters are brought before you? Because in my mind, it's an infringement of the right of a child if they can't get the education that they deserve, that they ought. Do you ever get such cases coming to you?
We do, but they're few. They're not many. And the ones that come to us are the ones where there is neglect by the parent to take this child to school. So we are basically saying that with free education, we expect every parent to take their child to school, but we know there are certain fees around that free education some are not able to afford.
Yes.
But there's a clear-cut case of neglect where the parent is able and capable of taking this child, but they don't. So the Children's Act has sections within it that provide an offense if you infringe any of the rights of the child, including the right to education. So yes, we do prosecute those cases. But also it requires us to work with our stakeholders like the Ministry of Education. So once you have charged the parent with failing to take this child to school, what next? That child needs to go to school. And that's where we have to liaise with the Ministry of Education to now come in and take this child and make sure they have a place to get their education. Of course, we still a way to go before we get to that state where we are saying every child in Kenya is getting education.
Right.
If someone had a case against the Ministry of Education, would you prosecute?
It might be more like a public interest litigation. And
Yes.
I wish Omkia Omtata would take up some of these cases for children. Just take PIL cases to court, where these children in Turkana are disadvantaged because the county does
It's not recognizing.
is not building the schools
Yeah.
for these children. Yes, so it would be more of a quasi-civil case.
Right.
Yes, so for us would only come in if there's a criminal element to it.
It is a crime, though.
Absolutely, it is a crime.
If you
Abrogation
deny
of
someone their
rights.
basic rights, is that not a crime?
It is a crime.
It would depend on the case. And for example, if a parent went to get admitted to school and they had everything, but the school declined to
Yes.
admit their child, then
Well, we've got to thank you for joining us this morning. An hour does run quickly, looking at these very important issues. And thanks for coming in, Caroline, Karimi, to shed the light on these as we celebrate the Day of the African Child today. Thank you. And it would be really great to engage with you in the future again.